What happens when love strikes at lightning speed and fades even faster? Today we are counting down the most shocking celebrity marriages that lasted 24 hours or less. Buckle up because some of these will blow your mind. Starting off at number 5, we have Eddie Murphy and Tracy Edmonds. Eddie Murphy, the king of comedy, tied the knot with businesswoman Tracy Edmonds on New Year's Day in 2008. The ceremony took place on a private island in Bora Bora. It seemed like a fairy tale wedding. But just 14 days later the couple announced they were done. The reason? According to sources, they realized they were better as friends than as husband and wife. Sometimes the honeymoon phase ends before the honeymoon even starts. At number 4, we have Renee Zellweger and Chesney. Oscar-winning actress Renee Zellweger married country singer Chesney in May of 2005. The wedding was small and intimate in the Caribbean. But here is where it gets wild. Just 4 months later, Renee filed for an annulment citing fraud as the reason. Fans were left wondering what on earth happened. The truth? Kenny reportedly was not ready for the commitment that came with marriage. Renee wanted a family and Kenny was not on the same page. It was a quick and quiet end to what many thought would be a beautiful love story. Coming in at number 3, we have Carmen, Electra and Dennis Rodman. This one is legendary. In November of 1998, Carmen Electra and NBA star Dennis Rodman got married in Las Vegas. The twist? Dennis was so drunk he barely remembered the ceremony. He later said he did not even remember saying "I do." Carmen, on the other hand, was completely sober and fully committed. The marriage lasted just 9 days before Dennis filed for annulment. He claimed he was not mentally capable of making such a big decision. Carmen was devastated, but she handled it with grace and humor. This Las Vegas disaster became one of the most talked about celebrity moments of the 90s. At number 2, we have Dennis Hutter and Michelle Phillips. Michelle Phillips was a member of the iconic band The Mamas and the Papas. In 1988 she married actor Dennis Hutter. The wedding was intimate and romantic. But just 8 days later it was over. The reason was not dramatic at all. Michelle simply said they rushed into it and realized they were not compatible. It was a quiet ending to a very short marriage. Some called it the shortest Hollywood marriage at the time. And finally at number 1, the record holder for the shortest celebrity marriage ever, Britney Spears and Jason Alexander. This is the one everyone remembers. On January 3, 2004, pop superstar Britney Spears woke up in Las Vegas married to her childhood friend Jason Alexander. They had gone out the night before and decided to get married on a whim. The ceremony lasted just 55 hours before it was annulled. Britney later said it was all a joke that went too far. Jason, on the other hand, was heartbroken. He later tried to sue Britney for millions, but the case was dismissed. This impulsive Vegas wedding became one of the most famous celebrity stories of all time. So what do all these marriages have in common? Rushed decisions, alcohol, and a lack of real connection. Love is powerful, but it needs time to grow. These celebrities learned the hard way that a wedding ring does not fix everything. Sometimes the fastest way to say "I do" is also the fastest way to say "I do not" anymore. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more wild celebrity stories.